For generations, children have heard a gentle lie, a lonely girl in a tall tower, a wicked witch, and a rescuer who climbs her hair to deliver a happy ending. But buried beneath that simple story is a disturbing truth about stolen children, locked rooms, and the quiet terror of being protected from the world. Today, we will step back from the glossy versions of Rapunzel you see in modern animation and return to the older European roots of the tale. We will explore where this story came from, what kind of world created it, and why so many cultures repeat the image of a girl hidden away above the ground. Because Rapunzel is not just a fantasy about magic hair, it is also a coded story about control, desire, and the fear of a young woman's freedom. To understand the dark secret beneath the tower, we first need to understand where that tower came from. The story of Rapunzel feels timeless, but it did not appear out of nowhere. It has a long, tangled history that stretches back through different countries, earlier stories, and changing ideas about women, children, and power. Long before most people heard the name Rapunzel, storytellers across Europe were already sharing tales about girls locked away in towers or hidden rooms. These stories existed in an age when families, especially fathers or guardians, controlled almost every part of a young girl's life. A daughter's marriage, her movements, even who she spoke to, could be tightly restricted. In that world, the idea of a girl trapped high above the ground was not just fantasy. It was a kind of exaggerated reflection of real social rules. One of the earliest known versions of the Rapunzel story appeared in Italy in the early 17th century. An Italian writer named Giambattista Basile included a tale called something like Petrocinella, which means little parsley, in his collection of stories. In this version, the mother steals parsley from an ogress's garden while she is pregnant. She is caught, and to save herself, she promises her unborn child to the ogress. When the child is born, the ogress eventually comes to claim her. The girl grows up hidden away in a tower, far from the world. Already, the building blocks of the story are here. A bargain over an unborn child, a powerful woman who takes the child away, a tower that acts as both home and prison. But even at this early stage, the story is about something more than magic. It reflects the fear of losing a child, the idea that a mistake by a parent can shape a child's entire life, and the belief that a girl's life can be traded or controlled without her consent. As the story traveled and changed, it took on new forms. Folktales were not fixed books. They were living stories, told and retold by different people in different places. Each time someone repeated the story, they could change details, add their own fears, or smooth away parts that felt too harsh. Over time, storytellers in German-speaking regions shaped their own versions. By the early 19th century, two brothers in what is now Germany were collecting folk stories from their region. Their names were Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. They believed that the stories told by peasants and villagers carried the soul of the nation. They began writing down these tales, editing them, and publishing them in collections. One of those stories was Rapunzel. The Grimms based their Rapunzel tale partly on earlier versions like the Italian story, but they changed important details. In their version, a pregnant woman becomes obsessed with a plant called rampion, growing in the garden of a powerful enchantress. Her husband sneaks into the garden to steal some for her. When he is caught, the enchantress forces him to promise his unborn child as payment. When the baby girl is born, the enchantress takes her away and raises her, eventually locking her in a tall tower with no door and no stairs. The only way to enter is to climb her long hair. The time when the Grimm brothers were writing was full of social and moral anxieties. Ideas about proper behavior, especially for women, were strict. Girls were expected to be pure, obedient, and sheltered. The Grimm's collection was meant partly for families, and they edited their tales over several editions to make them more suitable for what they saw as a moral audience. They removed some details that felt too sexual or too violent, while actually making other kinds of violence more extreme, especially when it served as punishment. In the case of Rapunzel, their edits changed the story in revealing ways. In the first published version, the story clearly suggests that Rapunzel becomes pregnant after secretly meeting the prince. Later editions quietly removed the most obvious hints, making the story seem more innocent on the surface, but the core structure remained. A girl is taken as payment for her parents' desire. She is raised by a controlling guardian. She is locked away from the world. When she tries to follow her own desires, she is severely punished. This mix of edits shows something important about the culture of that time. The brothers wanted to protect the image of purity, especially for young readers, yet the story itself still carried strong messages about shame, control, and fear. The changes did not erase the darkness. They simply pushed it below the surface. Rapunzel was not only influenced by moral ideas, it also grew out of real fears and social patterns. In many parts of Europe, it was common for girls to be placed in convents, boarding schools, or strict households for their own good. Wealthy families sometimes tried to control inheritance or marriage by deciding who a daughter could meet. A girl who disobeyed could be punished, sent away, or cut off from her family. Stories about locked girls echoed these practices, turning social rules into symbolic towers. At the same time, tales like Rapunzel were also shaped by religious ideas. Themes of temptation, fall, and punishment run through the story. The garden in which the pregnant woman steals the rampion feels like a distant echo of the Garden of Eden. A forbidden desire leads to a terrible cost. The child, who did nothing wrong, pays the price. Later, when Rapunzel meets the prince, their secret relationship brings down another wave of punishment. There is a strong suggestion that female desire, even when gentle and loving, must be controlled, hidden, or punished. The story continued to evolve as the Grimm collection spread across Europe and beyond. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, their tales were translated into many languages. Rapunzel began to appear in children's books, often with illustrations that softened the sharpest edges. The witch might be drawn as a comic villain. The tower might look almost cozy. The more the story was given to children as a simple fairy tale, the more its deeper, unsettling themes were pushed into the background. Yet underneath, the pattern stayed the same. A powerful authority figure claims the right to own a child. The child is isolated in the name of love or protection. Any attempt to break free leads to violence. These are not random story choices. They mirror long-standing patterns of control in families, religions, and societies. In the 20th century, animated films and popular retellings gave Rapunzel a new life. Some versions kept the tower and the magical hair, but changed the tone to comedy or light adventure. Others turned the witch into a mother figure who claims she is keeping Rapunzel safe from a cruel world. These changes did not erase the structure of the story. They simply made it easier to consume. Modern audiences were often encouraged to see the tale as a romantic fantasy, a trapped princess, a daring rescuer, a happy ending. But if we look back at the origins and development of the story, a different picture appears. Rapunzel is part of a wider group of tales about child bargaining, about women being locked away, and about the fear of female independence. The story may have started as a folk narrative passed from voice to voice, but it grew into a powerful cultural symbol. It also matters that Rapunzel has survived while other stories have faded. Many folk tales were never written down. Many others were forgotten as times changed. The staying power of Rapunzel suggests that the image of the tower and the girl inside speaks to something deep and ongoing. Parents still worry about the danger of the outside world. Societies still argue over how much freedom young women should have. And stories are still used, consciously or unconsciously, to guide behavior. Inside the story of Rapunzel, the real conflict does not begin with magic hair or a charming prince. It begins with a quiet decision made long before Rapunzel understands anything about the world. A bargain is struck over her life, and she has no voice in it. That silent beginning sets up everything that follows, and it is the key to understanding how the story slowly turns darker with each step. Once Rapunzel is taken by the enchantress and raised in isolation, her daily life becomes carefully controlled. She is shut away in a tower with no door and no stairs. The only way in or out is through her hair, which she lets down at the command of the woman she calls her keeper. From the outside, this can look like a simple fairy tale image. But if we look at the conflict, we see a young girl whose body, movements, and even thoughts are managed by someone else. She learns that obedience is connected to survival. If she does what she is told, she is fed and visited. If she does not, she is alone, and she has nowhere to go. The enchantress claims to love Rapunzel and to be her protector, but the way she shows that love is through absolute control. She chooses who Rapunzel meets, what she knows about the world, and how she understands herself. The tower becomes a tool that freezes Rapunzel in a kind of permanent childhood. Every part of her life is designed to keep her dependent. The conflict here is not just between a witch and a girl. It is between control and growth, between a guardian's fear and a young woman's natural desire to live her own life. The turning point begins when another person enters the story by accident. A prince, riding through the forest, hears Rapunzel singing from the tower. Her voice reaches him before she does. He does not see her face or her hair at first. He hears a sound of beauty coming from a place of isolation. This detail matters because it shows how the outside world is drawn in. Rapunzel's voice, which she may think is trapped like her body, becomes a signal that escapes the tower's walls. The prince tries to find a way inside but cannot, at least not at first. He watches and waits. Then he sees the enchantress call out the famous line, asking Rapunzel to let down her hair. He sees the older woman climb up and realizes that the hair is being used as a living ladder. Here, the conflict shifts. The tower is no longer completely closed. A weakness in the prison is revealed, and someone from the outside learns how to use it. When the prince copies the enchantress's call and Rapunzel lets down her hair, she is not expecting anyone new. She has learned to respond on command. Obedience has become a habit. So when a strange man climbs into her room, her world is shaken. Depending on the version, she is afraid at first, then curious, and eventually open to him. For the first time, someone treats her not as a possession, but as a person who can be loved and chosen. Their meetings change the story from a simple tale of imprisonment into something much more dangerous in the eyes of the enchantress. In many versions, the prince visits Rapunzel repeatedly. They talk, they form a bond, and they plan a future together. Rapunzel asks him to bring silk or thread so she can slowly weave a ladder to escape on her own. This detail is important. She does not simply wait to be rescued. She begins to take active steps to change her life. The conflict is now clear. Rapunzel is torn between the controlled safety of the tower and the risky hope of freedom. As their secret relationship grows, so does the tension. Every visit is a risk. Every shared plan is an act of rebellion, even if Rapunzel herself does not think in such bold words. She is simply following a human desire to choose her own companion, to see the world, to step beyond the limits that have been placed on her since birth. The tower, once a symbol of absolute power, becomes a temporary barrier she believes she can outsmart. The story escalates when the enchantress discovers what is happening. In the earlier Grimm version, she finds out in a striking and simple way. Rapunzel, still innocent in many ways, asks why her dress is becoming tighter around the waist, even though it used to fit. This is a coded way of revealing that she is pregnant. Her body has changed, and she does not yet understand what that means. The enchantress, however, understands immediately. This moment is the heart of the conflict. Rapunzel's body tells the truth that her words do not. The enchantress realizes that Rapunzel has stepped outside the rules, that she has formed a bond with someone else, and that the tower has failed as a tool of control. Her reaction is not sadness, but rage. She does not ask what Rapunzel wants. She does not question her own harsh methods. She acts to restore control as violently as possible. In many tellings, the enchantress cuts off Rapunzel's long hair. This is not just a change of hairstyle, it is a symbolic act of power. The hair has been used as a ladder, a bridge between the tower and the world. Cutting it is like destroying the only door. It is also a way of shaming Rapunzel. The very thing that made her special, the thing everyone used and admired, is taken away in a single act. After this, the enchantress banishes Rapunzel to a barren place, often described as a desert or wilderness. Here, the conflict moves into a second phase. Rapunzel is no longer trapped in a high stone prison, but she is still trapped in another way. She is alone, possibly pregnant, forced to survive without support, and cut off from both her former guardian and the prince. The punishment is harsh and absolute. It tells us that, in the mind of the enchantress, disobedience and romantic love are crimes that deserve exile and suffering. The prince also faces punishment, even though he knows nothing about the discovery at first. When he returns to the tower and calls out to Rapunzel, the enchantress lets down the cut hair, tricking him into climbing up. Instead of finding Rapunzel, he finds the woman who has taken everything from her. She tells him he will never see Rapunzel again and throws him from the tower. In some versions, he falls into thorns that blind him. In others, he is wounded almost to the point of death. This fall marks another major development. The man who believed he could simply ride in, climb up, and claim a happy ending now faces the same kind of helplessness Rapunzel has always known. He wanders blind through the land, unable to see and unsure if Rapunzel is even alive. The story has moved from secret romance to full tragedy. Both central characters are punished for their attempt to create a life beyond the control of the enchantress. Time passes. In many versions, years go by, though the story often does not name the exact length. Rapunzel gives birth to children, often twins, and raises them in her lonely exile. The prince, still blind, continues to walk through forests and wild places, guided only by memory and hope. Their separation is not a momentary test. It becomes a long, drawn-out consequence, a reminder of how powerful the enchantress's decisions were. The next key development is their reunion. It happens not through magic spells or heroic battles, but by chance and persistence. One day, the prince hears a familiar voice singing. It is the same voice that once drifted from the tower and drew him in. He follows the sound and finds Rapunzel. She runs to him, and her tears of joy fall into his eyes. In many tellings, those tears heal his blindness. He can see again, and he can finally look at the woman he has loved in the full light of day, no longer in a secret hidden room. This healing scene can feel like a simple, happy ending, but it also marks a powerful shift in the story's power structure. The enchantress is no longer present. The tower has been left behind. Rapunzel's tears, a symbol of her suffering and love, become the force that restores the prince's sight. The power to harm, once held by the enchantress, is replaced by the power to heal, now held by Rapunzel herself. Depending on the version, Rapunzel and the prince then return to his kingdom with their children and live together. On the surface, this sounds like a normal fairy tale conclusion, but we have to notice what has changed. At the beginning, Rapunzel's life is shaped by deals made before she is born. Her guardian claims ownership over her fate. By the end, she has a family of her own, formed through her own choices. The tower that once defined her existence is no longer part of her world. Even so, the story does not erase the damage. The years of isolation, the violence, the blindness, and the exile all leave a mark. The conflict is not simply resolved. It is transformed. The characters have to live with the scars of what they went through, even if the final scene tries to wrap everything in a sense of peace. Across different retellings, this central conflict stays the same, even when the tone changes. Some modern versions turn the enchantress into a more complex figure, a mother who claims she is only trying to protect Rapunzel from a dangerous world. Others make the prince less of a rescuer and more of a partner. Some stories give Rapunzel more agency earlier, letting her question her situation and push back against her guardian. But nearly every version keeps the core pattern: strict control, secret connection, severe punishment, painful separation, and eventual escape. When we look past the events of the Rapunzel story and focus on what they mean, it becomes clear that this is not just a tale about magic and romance. It is a story built from symbols that speak to very real fears and desires in human societies. The tower, the hare, the enchantress, the blinded prince, the lonely desert, and the final reunion are not just plot pieces. They are images that have carried powerful messages across generations. The tower is one of the clearest symbols. It represents separation, control, and the idea that safety can be created by cutting someone off from the world. In many cultures, especially in earlier centuries, women's bodies and movements were tightly controlled. Girls were kept indoors, watched carefully, and told that the world outside was full of danger. The tower turns this idea into a physical structure. It is an extreme version of rules and walls that already existed in everyday life. The dark secret here is that what looks like protection can actually be a form of imprisonment. The figure of the enchantress deepens this message. She claims ownership over Rapunzel because of a bargain made with the parents. She insists that everything she does is for Rapunzel's good, yet she uses fear, isolation, and punishment. This reflects a pattern found in many families and institutions. Authority figures who present control as love. The story exposes the way care can be twisted into domination, especially when the person in power believes they know what is best and never allows the child to decide anything for herself. Rapunzel's hair carries some of the most striking symbolism in the tale. On a simple level, it is a tool, a living rope. But long flowing hair has often been linked to youth, beauty, and sexuality in European culture. By making her hair the ladder that others use, the story suggests that her body becomes the bridge between captivity and freedom. The enchantress uses it to visit and supervise her. The prince uses it to reach her in secret. Rapunzel herself does not walk down from the tower, others climb up to her. Her body becomes central, yet she has little control over how it is used. This is one reason many modern readers and scholars see the cutting of her hair as such a violent act. When the enchantress learns that Rapunzel has chosen a lover and begun to imagine a different life, she responds by attacking the symbol of Rapunzel's emerging womanhood. Cutting the hair is not only about blocking the prince, it is about shaming Rapunzel, stripping away what made her special, and trying to push her back into powerlessness. The story quietly shows how societies often respond to female desire with attempts to shame or erase it. The prince's blindness adds another layer of meaning. In older symbolic traditions, blindness is often connected to ignorance, pride, or the price of seeing something forbidden. In the Rapunzel story, the prince is punished for entering a space he was not meant to enter and for helping Rapunzel attempt to escape. His fall from the tower and the loss of his sight can be read as a warning to those who interfere with rigid systems of control. But the way his blindness is later healed by Rapunzel's tears suggests something else as well. It hints that true vision or true understanding comes through shared suffering and real emotional connection, not through power or force. The desert or wilderness where Rapunzel raises her children is another important symbol. It is empty, harsh, and far from any support, yet it is also a place where none of the old rules apply. She is no longer under the watchful eye of the enchantress. She is poor and alone, but she is also, for the first time, living a life that is fully hers. In many traditions, deserts and wild places are used as spaces of testing and transformation. The story follows this pattern, even if it does not explain it in religious or spiritual terms. Rapunzel's time in exile shapes her into someone who can later heal the prince and build a new life. Taken together, these symbols have had a strong influence on how people think about overprotection, control, and growing up. In psychology and counseling, the idea of a Rapunzel complex or Rapunzel syndrome has sometimes been used in different ways to describe either extreme isolation or unhealthy dependence. While not always used in a strict clinical sense, the name shows how deeply the image of the girl in the tower has entered modern language. When someone says a person is being kept in a tower, people understand they mean isolation disguised as care. Rapunzel also holds an important place in feminist readings of fairy tales. Writers and scholars have pointed out how the story reflects patriarchal and hierarchical structures, even when the main controlling figure is a woman. The enchantress does not stand outside social norms. She enforces them. She acts like a system that tries to freeze a young woman's growth. At the same time, modern feminist retellings often give Rapunzel more agency, letting her question her situation earlier or telling the story from her point of view. These new versions use the old symbols but shift the focus, highlighting resistance and self-discovery rather than only punishment. Across cultures, there are other tales that mirror parts of the Rapunzel story. In Greek myth, the princess Danae is locked in a bronze tower or underground chamber because a prophecy says her son will bring about her father's downfall. In some versions of that story, Zeus reaches her in the form of a golden rain, and she conceives Perseus. Here again, we see a young woman isolated to control her future and her body. The attempt to shut out danger leads to the very outcome the father feared. The pattern is similar to Rapunzel. Extreme control does not prevent change. It often helps create it. In other traditions, the idea of secluding young women appears in different forms. In parts of South Asia, purdah and other customs have kept women separate in private spaces, especially in earlier centuries. In some East Asian histories, upper-class women were kept in inner chambers with limited contact with men outside the family. While these practices are complex and vary over time and place, they share a basic idea with the Rapunzel story that a woman's honor and safety can be protected by limiting her freedom. The story of Rapunzel captures the emotional cost of this idea in a form that can be told to children, even when they do not fully understand the deeper social context. The continuing impact of Rapunzel can also be seen in modern media. When large studios adapt the tale, they usually keep the tower and the magical hair, but they modify the relationships and the tone. For example, some popular animated versions portray the guardian as a mother who constantly sings about keeping Rapunzel safe, while secretly using her hair for personal benefit. The film wraps this in humor and songs, but the underlying message remains sharp. A parent or guardian can claim to love a child while actually using them as a resource. By watching these stories, modern audiences, including children, absorb ideas about emotional manipulation, gaslighting, and control, even if they do not know those exact terms. Contemporary retellings in novels, comics, and television often push the symbolism even further. They may show Rapunzel cutting her own hair as a sign of rebellion, or turning the tower into a place she chooses to leave rather than a prison others unlock. Some versions move the story into modern settings, where the tower becomes a locked apartment, a remote compound, or even a controlling digital environment. These new forms show how flexible the core symbols are. The tower can be any structure that limits choice. The hair can be any trait or talent others try to exploit. The enchantress can be any person or system that refuses to let someone grow up and make mistakes. Because the story has survived and been retold in so many ways, it also influences how we talk about healing and recovery. The final scene, where Rapunzel's tears restore the prince's sight, may seem like a simple magical fix, but it points to a deeper truth that many people recognize. When two people share their pain honestly, when they meet again after hardship, they can help each other see the world more clearly. The story suggests that the answer to violent control is not another act of force, but a connection based on mutual recognition and care. At the same time, the tale warns us not to trust any version of love that must lock someone away to keep them safe. It invites listeners and viewers to ask hard questions. When is protection actually control? When does guidance turn into possession? And what happens to those who are kept in towers, real or symbolic, for too long? In the end, the dark secret buried beneath Rapunzel's tower is not a hidden curse or a forgotten spell. It is the reminder that many societies have tried to manage their fears by restricting the freedom of the young, especially young women, and then calling that restriction love. The story shows the damage this causes, the rebellions it sparks, and the heavy price paid by everyone involved. Rapunzel's journey from traded infant to imprisoned girl, from punished lover to healing mother, traces a path that still feels familiar today. It reflects our ongoing struggle between fear and trust, control and freedom, safety and autonomy. When we retell her story, whether in old books or bright animated films, we are not just passing on a fairy tale. We are passing on a conversation about who gets to decide a life and at what cost. Seen this way, the image of the tower changes. It is no longer only a romantic backdrop. It becomes a warning. It asks us to look at the walls we build around others and around ourselves, and it quietly suggests that real, happily ever after can only begin once those walls are questioned, climbed, and finally left behind.